Greetings, everyone. My clock has 3 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Susan Patrick, the CEO of Aurora Institute and the co-founder of Competency Works. Next slide. Today, I'll start by providing an introduction on some key ideas. Today's webinar will examine how 2 school districts made a smooth and swift transition to learning anytime, anywhere during our school closures with COVID-19. We'll save questions and answers for the end. Next slide. Please use the chat function. You can click on the bottom of your screen if you don't have the chat function up. Feel free to ask questions. We'll be monitoring those questions and I'll be facilitating today. We hope that you will also share your learning when questions come up, if you have insights or resources that you want to share. For social media, please share what you're learning using hashtag COVID-EDU on Twitter. And also, we will be recording today's webinar and archiving the webinar. Next slide. So today we have 2 districts and 2 district leaders. I'd like to introduce our presenters. They're nationally recognized systems leaders. And what's so interesting is that what we're seeing across the country with the school closures, with COVID-19 that happened so quickly, and the school closures that lasted longer than we could have expected. One thing that I think is interesting, having been at iNACOL and Aurora now, we've been working with leaders in online and blended learning since 2003. But the delivery model alone was not sufficient for what we needed to innovate to really make sure our students were ready to learn anytime, anywhere. And I'll say this clearly, even districts that had some online courses or some blended learning in some of their schools, the traditional delivery models that were still in the majority of schools in districts, those one-size-fits-all model, expose their limitations. It exposed the challenges and really exposed the inequities across the system during COVID. In fact, a colleague from Hong Kong recently mentioned this quote: "The consciousness of our education inequality and the disparities that were hidden before COVID really were from our systems of, quote, uniform schooling." Well, why do I bring this up? Because today, with Lindsay School District, with Kettle Moraine School District, what we saw are future directions that have been put into place over a decade on these innovations for equity and ensuring success for all. What was it that allowed Lindsay and Kettle Moraine to make this shift to anytime, anywhere learning so smoothly and quickly? What we're talking about today is not just tweaking the current system, not just using technology for a delivery model. What we're talking about is a fundamental look at what is needed for building skills and building the agency that students need to be able to set their goals every day to truly learn in a way that works for them. So next slide. Let's go ahead and take a look at a view of what's needed. What are the skills? If you look, this is from UNESCO in 2015. At the top of this list is learning how to learn and the development of competencies. On the right side, you'll see the transformation of educational landscapes. There are networks of learning spaces. So students are learning at home, they're learning in schools, they're learning in the communities, they're learning in internships. It also focuses on the left side here on the role of educators as a priority. And back up to the top, we must rethink curriculum development and what it is that students need to know and be able to do. So next slide. Whether you call it mastery-based learning, competency-based learning, performance-based learning, we want to honor the words that you use locally in your own context. But we think it's important to clarify these definitions before I turn it over to our presenters. Next slide. So what we mean by a competency-based education system is that, number one, there is student agency, and students are empowered daily in their learning to make important decisions about their learning experiences, how they will create learning, how they will apply that knowledge and demonstrate it. And second, assessment is meaningful to them. They are understanding where they have not quite gotten it yet, whether they are exhibiting that at a level of proficiency or mastery, and if not, students are getting immediate, timely feedback until they reach mastery. Students are progressing when they have evidence through their work on mastery, not seat time, and that there are strategies in place to ensure equity for all students are reaching high levels of learning. There are rigorous common expectations of building knowledge, skills, dispositions. A truly competency-based learning system has explicit, transparent, measurable, and transferable goals and clear outcomes. And those outcomes are calibrated so that they are equal expectations for all. So next slide. What does this look like? We know where every student is every day, whether they're inside of school or outside of school. It means that we're meeting students where they are in their learning. It means that we have evidence of their work with mastery. We have a truly learner-centered, student-centered environment, and it means that students can learn anytime, any place. Next slide. So we have two frameworks that I just want to call attention to quickly. One is the Quality Principles book for competency-based ed that Competency Works published, and I highlight in the upper right corner, number 7. This is actually about building student agency and ownership, and at the bottom, it's about advancing on demonstrated mastery. We could go into all of these 16, but I'll just leave this framework with you and know that in this book, it gives specific examples of what you're looking for and red flags and implementation for a high quality, learner-centered, competency-based education system. Next slide. And last, our equity strategies report. This is an important set of strategies that provide really clarity on what competency-based systems mean to provide equity for each and every student. It means, if you focus on this middle row, clear and transparent information, communicating clearly where every student is. We're monitoring pace, progress, and proficiency. There's a strong culture of learning, growth, mindset. It's caring. Learning environments are inclusive and responsive, and we are ensuring that all students are learning and believe that all students can learn. So in a competency-based system, every learner, whether adult or child, is on their own journey and has their own pathway for a lifelong learning journey. And now, this is the moment you've been waiting for. Please let me introduce our presenters. First, we'll have Tom Rooney. He's the superintendent of Lindsay Unified School District, where he's engaged in system-wide transformative work of building a learner-centered, performance-based system throughout the entire K-12 learning community. In June of 2016, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative announced a partnership with the Lindsay Unified School District to advance the performance-based system in the district and beyond. Mr. Rooney is a highly knowledgeable, research-based in instructional practices and is a key leader involved in work related to the development, evaluation, and modification of all aspects of the performance-based system in Lindsay Unified. He maintains a strong track record of successful and committed leadership at the site and district levels focused on serving the learners and families of the Lindsay community. I would also like to mention and recognize that Tom is a board member of the Aurora Institute, and he just shared with us before that there was a significant earthquake not far from him. So Tom, I see your camera might be shaking a little right now, actually. If you need to go, we'll just make a transition. Hopefully you're okay. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to you, Tom. Thank you so much.
Hello, Susan, and all who are participating from throughout the nation and the world. And I'm just honored to be sharing a little bit about Lindsay's journey, a bit certainly about our system and the design and how that system has truly prepared us for not only for the transition into what we face, the unknowns of the COVID-19 situation, but also the future conditions that we may find ourselves in. So yeah, and so if I happen to duck and cover at some point, it means that there's an aftershock that has hit, and I'll hop back on as soon as I'm able. So as we are planning, one of the things you want to know is that as we are planning the closing of facilities in Lindsay, we literally were simultaneously planning on the opening up for learning. We literally closed our facilities on March 17th, and we opened up for learning on March 18th. You see, we never wanted to get the message that the schools in Lindsay were ever closing. We literally said the schools have not closed. The physical building has closed, but the learning, the loving, and the support that you receive from your learning community will continue no matter what the situation that we face going forward. So because in rural communities such as Lindsay, the school system is essentially providing learners and families with not only learning, but often with food, connectedness, opportunity, access to resources. And there's so many situations where the schools, in reality, provide safety for some of our learners. Next slide, please. This slide is about the demographics of Lindsay. And I want to share this slide with you so that you understand the context of the community and the children that we serve. We are a rural community in California in the Central Valley. 100% of our learners qualify for free and reduced lunch. You can see that learners that over 50% come to us speaking a language other than English, primarily Spanish. And you can see that 44% of our learners come from a home where one or both parents did not graduate from high school. And I share this data with you as a context because I want you to see, because in a few slides, I'm going to share with you the results that we're getting. And I share this because this is about no matter what your conditions, no matter what the situation is that you're facing, a number of English learners, situations with poverty, low parent education level, all of these dilemmas or situations that we face, it doesn't take away the belief or the possibility that all learners can produce at high levels of academic excellence, and all learners can produce personal excellence in their life. And in Lindsay, that's our commitment. I have to tell you that as a superintendent, the thought of closing our schools was horrifying. I have to admit that there were many sleepless nights, and there were times when I shed a tear, many tears. I shed tears for our families and for our learners, because in our community, the school system is essential to so many of the services that our children need. And I didn't want a single learner to feel that we had closed our doors on them. If you could imagine, in the midst of a crisis, closing the hospitals, if there was a medical crisis. In some communities like Lindsay, closing the schools would have maybe had the same feeling. Why would you close the schools when we need you during this time of uncertainty, during this time of worry, this time of fear? And so I will tell you that I saw the inevitable coming, that eventually we were going to need to close our schools, and we shifted into how do we change the narrative to make sure that it is not about closing schools, that it is really more about opening up for learning in a different way. And I think that was a really important element of our story and journey as we went forward. Next slide, please. This is who we serve in Lindsay. This is a picture of a real Lindsay family. Moms and dads that love their children deeply. And these moms and dads simply dream of a very promising future for their children, an opportunity for learning in college, for their own children that might not have been possible for them when they were in school. Our Lindsay parents, just like parents throughout this country and throughout many parts of the world, they bring their children to school. They put them on the buses, they drop them off at the curb in front of the schools, and they trust us as educators to give their children what they need to be successful in life. Our parents have given us their most prized possession. And one of the system elements in Lindsay is that we have accepted that responsibility and committed to delivering on that promise to our parents. In our system, as in every system, one should never blame the parents for anything, but they should commit to their responsibility of educating the children and giving them academic access and the academic achievement and the personal skill sets that they need to succeed in life. So as you can tell, we are deeply, systematically committed to every one of our Lindsay's children, and we are of service to their parents and to the community at all. Next slide, please. What this slide demonstrates is it shows the visual of what we have been building and producing and developing in Lindsay over about the past decade. What we are essentially and have designed is what's called the ideal learning experience. You see that in the very center of this slide. That's all it is about. In a customized competency or personalized system, it's about how do you provide the ideal learning experience for every learner, knowing that they learn in different ways and different time frames. And when you look at this slide, at the very bottom, there is this comment, this statement that says, driven by a future-focused strategic design. In Lindsay, that strategic design is the foundation of how we operate and how we function. That strategic design was designed and developed by the community over 10 years ago. It is not the vision or the mission or the dream of the superintendent or the school board, or we have not been implementing some program. We essentially enrolled and listened to the voice of our community, and the Lindsay community commissioned us to design the learning that we have been building, this learner-centered performance-based system that provides every learner with what they need when they need it. The system is creating a culture. So when you see all around the outside of the visual here, it's creating a culture of empowerment, of investment, a growth mindset culture, a culture of collaboration, and a results-driven culture. That's a key component of our system, is a culture that is uncompromisingly learner-centered. Because in Lindsay, our commitment to equity is to make sure that every learner gets what they need when they need it. But even more importantly than that, what we want is when our learners leave our system, we want them to tell us, you gave me what I needed when I needed it. Because we see equity really resounding in the voice of the learners. We want the learners to tell the story of equitable outcomes that they received, of equitable situations that they had access to. When we moved to distance learning, or anywhere, anytime learning on March 18th, our learners at every level of the every level, kindergarten through 12th, they knew where they were in their learning. They already had goals established in their personalized learning plans. They had access to learning through thousands of playlists in our Empower Learner Management System. They all had devices, and they had internet connectivity through our community Wi-Fi project that we put in place 4 years ago. So we were poised and ready for this, but I want to say what was most important. What was most important is that our learners have been taught and lived in a culture where they were empowered and they became self-invested, where they developed a mindset that they are responsible for their learning, that they had the tools and the empowerment to literally navigate their learning journey going forward. So I can't stress enough that part of the system is to deeply build a culture in the mindset of the children you serve, a culture that they believe in themselves, and a culture that they know that regardless of my circumstances, my situation of poverty or learning language or whatever it might be, I can take ownership over my future. And our schools and the learning community, the school system, is to create the conditions for learners to thrive no matter what their situation may be. And you see another element of this visual here is these kind of puzzle pieces that go around the outside, or the little pictures, the little pie elements. And I'm not gonna, it would take me weeks to unpack each of those. We have training modules that really go deep into each of those, but I'm just gonna touch on a couple of them that I think were so important during COVID-19. One of them you see on the upper right, it says quality instruction. And when we talk about quality instruction, and we want to recognize that this is the bottom line. Even in a personalized, competency-based model, in a learner-centered model, whether it's instruction that's face-to-face or whether it's digital, it comes down to providing high-quality instruction that is informed by data and guided clearly by an identified curriculum and best pedagogical practices. In the end, no matter what our mode of instruction, it is about teaching. And more importantly, it is mostly or all about the learning. So when our facilities closed, we knew that our learning facilitators, our teachers, are referred to as learning facilitators, because that's what they actually do. It more clearly defines their role. And our learning facilitators would need extensive professional learning to ensure that they had the skills to understand how to use the most effective tools for distance learning. So a few days after closure, we had a district-wide Zoom where every member of our learning community was on this Zoom. And we basically said, this is a terrible situation that we're faced, but we will never turn our backs on the Lindsay learner. And we turned it around to say, what we are doing now is we are basically going to advance learning like we've never advanced before. And 4 days after our school closure, we had a full day professional learning that involved all of our teaching staff. And we had 21 different breakout sessions so that it was customized and people could choose what they wanted, and they could basically develop their skill set. And then even after that, on a weekly basis, several times per week, we had professional learning that was all done virtual, and much of it was conducted by our curriculum team, but also by our learning facilitators who were exploring and learning and developing skill sets that they never thought they would. We also offered trainings on Saturdays. This lasted all through the rest of the year. And I will say what was so interesting about it was that we had some learning facilitators that actually weren't as effective in the face-to-face instruction. Let me just say that. And they were knocking it out of the park in the distance learning. They were fully embracing it and just completely really embracing the growth mindset as a learner, as an adult learner, saying, what do I need to learn in order to most effectively serve my learners in this situation? I also want you to note there's just another element on it that's called varied evidence of learning. And it's, I think it's down at the bottom. This was another one I want to highlight that is so important, because in Lindsay and in a learner-centered model, varied evidence of learning means that it's not just about the state test, and it's not just about all those standardized elements. You actually have to look at what are the best ways that certain elements of the learning can be demonstrated. It is about competence. You have to demonstrate competence. And you don't only have to demonstrate competence in the academics, but in Lindsay, you also have to demonstrate competence in what we refer to as lifelong learning. And what in some areas it's referred to as social-emotional learning. Because in Lindsay, yes, we do care that you are academically proficient, but we also care about what kind of human being you are becoming. And so our lifelong learning calls out, it teaches, and it gives feedback to learners about, are they being culturally aware? Are they persevering through difficult situations? Are they being a culturally responsive person? Are they being a caring and compassionate human being? Are they embracing their responsibility as a global citizen to be economic contributors in the future? So we look at all of those elements of what kind of person they're becoming, and we give them feedback, because we not only want our graduates to be academically prepared, but we want them to be prepared as human beings for whatever else they may face. I'll tell you a quick story. If I could, and Susan, how much more time do I have? So I know, 5 more minutes? Okay, let me tell you a quick story and then I'll jump in, 5 or 6, okay. One quick story is about the power of social emotional learning or lifelong learning. I was speaking with the superintendent. This was about a superintendent in Pennsylvania, and it was about 8 years ago. And he was wondering, why are you guys making all this change and what's behind it? And why do you need this? He goes, I am a superintendent of a district where 85 to 90% of my graduates, high school graduates, go on to Ivy League schools or something comparable to that. They're all very high achievers. And so I don't see why there's a reason for me to change my system. And I said, well, tell me what your graduates are like as people. Tell me what kind of human beings they are. Are they caring, compassionate human beings? Do they recognize they need to give back to the world because of what they've been given and the opportunities they've received? He sat there for a moment, and then he said, in all honesty, a lot of them are jerks. And we have a lot of work to do. I'm just realizing it. They're entitled. They feel like the world owes them everything. They actually don't collaborate well. And so I bring this out as a story because we should focus on academic competency, but also on personal excellence. And in Lindsay, we do that. And I think about during COVID, what happened is we were giving credit for learners. We have some of our learners, you know, a 14-year-old boy who's at home trying to learn, and he has 5 little siblings who he's also trying to take care of and help them with their learning because both parents are gone all day at work. We should be giving him credit for something in life right there. We should be giving him credit for persevering, for being responsible for all of these elements. So remember that when you get into the learning that you have. So if you can go to the next slide, please. We all know this to be true. People learn in different ways in different time frames. And the sad element of so many traditional elements, traditional school systems, is they're not designed to honor this basic principle. They're designed to give everybody the same thing. They're not personalized, they're not customized. They're not meeting the learner's needs because it doesn't honor this basic principle like we do in Lindsay. The next slide. Because an element of our vision in Lindsay is this. And imagine being a part of a community and a system where every day Lindsay learners come to school and they are met at their developmental learning level. They are challenged, they are successful, and they leave school wanting to return tomorrow. That last line is the part that gets me the most, because that's what you truly want. Children leaving school thinking, you gave me what I wanted, and now I want to come back tomorrow. Next slide, please. This is a systems slide. I want to make a few comments about systems change, because I'm a systems leader. And what this shows is it shows a large arrow. That arrow is the mission and vision of the organization, the one that was designed and created by the community. And it has a bunch of smaller arrows inside this visual. Those smaller arrows represent, sometimes they represent the people in the organization. Sometimes they represent the departments, the curriculum department, the special ed department. Sometimes they represent the learning communities, the high school community, the elementary community. They're different sizes, they're different shapes, but you notice they're all going in the same direction. You see, in systems change, everyone in the system is committed to a common mission and vision. And your path there may look a little different. And your system, your learning community, you as an individual may be a little bit different, but you're all going in the same direction. In Lindsay, because we had systems aligned, we were able to make the transition in a much more effective manner because basically everyone in the system, our people who work in the food service, they don't serve food. They provide nutritious meals for children so children can learn. That's their thinking. That's how they think about their job. If you drive a bus, you actually are providing safe transportation so that children can be at a place where they can learn. Our tech department, it's about ensuring connectivity so that learners can learn via digital manner. So it's about making sure, because a lot of times we invest in our leadership or we invest in our teaching staff, and we forget about all the rest of the staff. Are they enrolled? Are they committed in your system? And in Lindsay, when we went to COVID, the very next day, we were serving thousands of meals. The very next day, we had thousands of learners connected to the internet because of our classified staff doing their role to carry this out. Systems focus is critical. and forget and remember about every person in your organization is a part of that mission and vision. Next slide. This is some data. I just spent a couple of minutes on it. You remember our 30 seconds on it, actually, as I'm running out of time. You remember our demographics. This is what's happening. And this is just a snippet. This is just a part of it. There's a lot more to it. Our learners are coming to school every day. 75% of them are going to college when they finish. 98% graduation rate. And not only are they going to college, they're getting a 4-year degree. 54% of our children of poverty get a 4-year degree in 4 years. And over 60% of them in 5 years, and over 70% of them in 6 years. That is changing the trajectory of what's possible for our children. Final couple of slides. I would just share this. This is what it's ultimately about in Lindsay. And this is what we're driven by. Meeting our learners at their level, guaranteeing their success, challenging them, inspiring them, ensuring that they are empowered to take control of their lives and their learning, and that they come to love the learning and they love the people who are actually supporting them in this journey. Because in the end, the next slide, in the end, this is what we have. We have our Lindsay graduate. And what we view that as this is our gift to the world. We've had these children, these young adults, for many times more hours than their parents had them. And now this is our gift, sending out people who are prepared to give to their community, people who are academically and have the personal skills to actually succeed in college, career, or whatever life may bring them. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was terrific. Now, please, I'm pleased to introduce Pat DeClatz. Patricia DeClatz is superintendent for the Kettle Moraine School District, a high-performing K-12 district serving 4,200 students located in southeastern Wisconsin. She was selected as Wisconsin's 2016 Superintendent of the Year by the Wisconsin Association of School District Administrators. She and Tom know each other well and have worked on a number of nationally recognized leadership events for transforming school systems. And I just want to point out that under Pat's leadership in Kettle Moraine, they have embraced a school board's challenge or charge to transform schools to better meet the needs of all students. In this, the district has done a number of initiatives, and they have also created 3 instrumentality charter high schools. 1 multi-age project-based elementary charter school, and a project-based interdisciplinary multi-age middle school. These learning environments serve to inform the district's work. They're all learning from each other in competency-based education and personalized learning. It really has been an honor for me personally to know Pat. She was one of our original iNACOL Aurora members almost 2 decades ago. And they have been working to personalize learning for students as well as personalized learning for staff. They're well known around the country for their work in deeper learning and also micro-credentialing as a foundation for redefining educator competencies, educator compensation, and the development of career pathways for staff too. So I just want to thank Tom again for that really remarkable, inspiring, and informative presentation. We'll be taking questions at the end. And now I'm honored to welcome Pat DeClatz and turn it over to you, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And I can't help but smile every time I get to spend time with Tom Rooney. As he was going through his presentation, I couldn't help but reflect on all the similarities. So I'll try not to repeat or be redundant. And next slide, please. Just for those of you that don't know where Kettle Moraine's located, we are in southeastern Wisconsin, about 30 miles west of Milwaukee, 45 miles east of Madison. And Next slide. While the demographic, while the size of the district is pretty comparable to what Tom has out in California, the demographics are probably polar opposites. So I love to include this little visual of the students because they come to us and they start as angelic, smiling, eager learners, and by the time they leave, we've helped them develop into robust, confident, enthusiastic citizens who feel very empowered to change the world. And whether they are effective in doing that or not, they know they will be heard. So when I stepped into my role at Kettle Moraine, our biggest learning gap, if you will, was with our most talented learners. Our gifted and talented students made the least amount of progress in their learning. And so again, as you think about some of the themes that Tom shared with you, many of them are themes that I would share as well. Next slide. I would just echo what Susan mentioned, that the work that we've been doing really began in 2000, and she mentioned needing a strong assessment literacy in order to advance personalized learning or navigate these waters that we're in. We started with building an understanding of what balanced assessment looked like and the implications of grading on a curve. That was back in the time of NCLB, and we really embraced the challenge that school was not, the purpose of school was not to sort kids, but to serve kids, all students. So with that understanding at the high level of No Child Left Behind, not at the detail level, please, but at that high, you know, kind of philosophical level of how do we meet the needs of all children, we began to redefine how we measure success and how we monitor progress. My board has held an expectation of growth rather than achievement. So regardless of where we are, we want to be able to look for a year's growth for a year's time, or perhaps more. And when I stepped into the role 14 years ago, we had 6 blue ribbon schools of excellence. We have evolved over that time to being a district of choice where our expectation is meeting the needs of each and every student, knowing that those needs are different and diverse. And even though our race may not demonstrate that diversity, every learner needs to be empowered with defining how they want to succeed, how they determine their goals. Next slide. When you talk about the model that we use, I think this slide is perhaps the best slide to show our model, because each of our 10 schools, the 4 charter schools, and 1 more traditional high school, I wouldn't call it traditional. If you were to come to see it, you wouldn't call it traditional. Our middle school, our elementary schools, they are unique. And we don't prescribe how, but we do, or the what, we prescribe these elements. So we talk about the self-awareness that we want a student to develop and the strong relationships. We know that student agency comes with a motivation, and choice helps to fuel that motivation. Having a voice in their learning and owning the responsibility of their learning, knowing again, as Tom mentioned, that people learn differently and at different times and places, and then holding really firmly to the fact that seat time is not a measure of anything other than seat time. But that demonstration of knowledge and skills, as Susan alluded to with the competency-based education, that unless you can demonstrate and unless you have artifacts and evidence of what you learned, I have no confidence of your learning. So as I was preparing for this talk, and thinking about the question about how do we manage change, I don't want any one of you to see me as the expert. I don't believe there is an expert in managing change because it's complicated and it's very, very contextual. I've been doing this work almost 2 decades and I still get it wrong at times. Context is everything, and COVID-19 really redefined our context. But one absolute truth about managing change, it's personal and it's emotional. So if you don't recognize those elements as you try to navigate these turbulent waters, you're going to miss the mark. The best advice I can give you is see the people who are involved in your context. Listen to their story, just like Tom told you stories. Listen to their story and learn what they are saying. I have stories of staff who had 3 roles going on. Not only were they teaching classrooms of children, but they were parenting their children and they were teaching their children. They had toddlers climbing on them during staff meetings. They had all of the context, right? All of the challenges that our parents were facing as we navigate this. And the development of empathy and appreciation for individual context is part of what makes us human. So before you try to provide the answer, make sure you understand the problem that you're trying to solve. And I would say how we decide what we're going to do is often as important as what we decide. People need to be heard and they need to be involved. So we could take many of the aspects that we expect of our teachers in personalized learning and apply it to ourselves, for our staff, and for our parents as we brought them along in this new COVID-19 context. So voice and choice, are we listening? Are we engaging? Are we setting goals? Are we building relationships? Are we motivating them through choice and giving them flexibility in their pacing? Next slide. When schools were closed in Wisconsin, we basically flipped in a weekend. And I'm going to show you some screenshots of our website because I think one of the key components in managing change is managing communication. And again, that's context specific. I have an ex-urban population, many white-collar workers, many people that are experts in their fields. And of course, everyone is an expert in education because we all have received one, right? So I have a lot of opinions that go into what is right for their own individual child. We were able to, again, that same time frame of March, middle March, our grades 6 through 12 all have a device through what we call a technology parent partnership. Parents co-own, co-pay for the device that they use. So those students had devices to take home, and those students had hotspots if they didn't have internet access themselves. That had already been established through our regular instructional programming. The challenge was our K-5, who did not have individual devices, and we actually gave them an extra week of vacation. The calendar that we had was a week of spring break, the last week in March. So the week before that spring break, our elementary students had a week of at home that allowed us to survey parents, determine needs for devices, determine needs for access points, and help our elementary teams get around the idea of how were they going to meet these virtual learning needs. Having learning management systems is absolutely essential. And in Kettle Moraine, we have multiple. So we're not a one-shop district. We use several learning management systems, but they are critical communication tools. So Early on, we said we are not introducing any new tech tools. We are not expecting anyone to learn new technology. And we went to a 4-day schedule where one day was project time or learning time without oversight from the teacher. And that day was used for collaboration among grade level teams, among content teams. It was used for professional development. It was used for school meetings. Some of it was open time, but it was an essential part of our success. Next slide. We communicated that, and at first when Wisconsin schools were closed, we thought we would be closed until the end of April. And so we put out communication in multiple modes. Internally, I established a daily leadership Zoom meeting. So we would all come together, the leaders of every school and at my department, my district office level, the key people would come together. It was a running agenda that's probably 50 pages long by now, but it was a running agenda. And at first it was very much about the operationalization of things. How could we give PPE to our hospitals and to our emergency responders? How could we help them with some of the needs that they had, organizing a blood drive, etc. So at the beginning, much of it was around just the organizational principles, but it evolved into much bigger topics and deeper topics. Having that standing meeting allowed us to stay on the same page, and anyone could add an agenda item. With the parents, I began a weekly Zoom, and I would say one of the benefits, and in every challenge there are also opportunities. One of the real benefits of COVID-19 is parents have never been more engaged in the learning of their children, in my understanding. They know what their kids are doing. It also gave me a chance to have a weekly video link with my parents to communicate to them that I heard their questions and that we were working on issues, and just to give them that personal context, because I couldn't meet them in a grocery store or have them come to a parent coffee. Updates on the web resources, and the schools were mirroring those very same efforts. Let's go to the next slide. One of the things that I wanted to talk about as that decision then came to the end of the school year, actually end of June 30th, we still are closed for learning and for any extracurricular event, was that accountability was a key element of what we wanted to do. And as we looked at how were we going to, we had an entire term that was delivered remotely, right? At the high school level, an entire term or quarter that needed to be graded. And as we looked at what were the key expectations on our learning continuums, artifacts and evidence were the tools that we used. One of the things that I think became very apparent with COVID-19, and I don't remember if it was Tom or Susan that mentioned it, but some of the issues that we have in school systems became very, very apparent. Social emotional connections are important. So how do we meet that need? We set clear expectations that every teacher would have visual connection, some type of, whether it was a Google Hangout or a Seesaw Exchange or a face-to-face, however, a virtual face-to-face, but students would be able to visually connect with their teacher a minimum of once a week. Sometimes that was through a class meeting, sometimes it was through a small mini lesson group, sometimes it was through one-on-one conferencing. Another thing that became very apparent was that our unengaged students were really missing in action. Like they weren't there. They weren't sitting in a seat unengaged. They simply weren't showing up. So we set in place a plan for communication and documentation of our efforts to reach out and starting with the teacher and then with the school guidance counselors, and then with the principal, and then with the, documenting these efforts for family meetings, parent and child, or parents and child, conferring about what was expected, how could we meet the need. And again, the empathy playing a really important role. Understanding if this student had to take responsibility for siblings because both parents were working, and how we could adjust our expectations to allow them to be successful, and helping them to understand that if you're not engaged, you won't be successful, right? There is accountability. In the same way, accountability for our teachers. Next slide. We knew that not every teacher had the same level of skill in using technology tools or teaching remotely. And we've had this learning document, this look for personalized learning. These are teacher tools that we have shared for many years. We continually update them, and this is just one slide. The link is embedded on that slide if people are interested in looking at it deeper. But what we know is, core belief, teachers want to help kids succeed. So my role at the district level is helping them accomplish that goal. So going in with that growth mindset, again, aligned to our vision and our mission of how we're going to accomplish that, helping them with coaching. Again, that one day that we had time where they weren't interacting with students, and then going into their small group meetings or into a team meeting, sitting in on a lesson virtually, to be able to observe and give them feedback and help them with tools or demonstrate something for them. A big learning that came about is our parents wanted more support. And it was really funny because the support was there all along. They just hadn't found it before. So we were able to share tutorials that we had shared with them at the beginning of the year on some of the tools or learning management systems. We were able to just reintroduce that to them, but it was their time of need, and now they were interested in learning. So without letting them know that that had been there all along, it wasn't about chastising them that they didn't know what we'd shared. It was about helping them understand how they could help their children in their work that they were doing. I would say we still have a lot of work to do, and we will continue to do that work. But the conferencing that we did with parents, I don't think we'll ever go back to a regular parent-teacher conference. Zoom meetings or Google Hangouts are much more convenient, and they are just as engaging when you've got the student, the parent, the teacher talking about those issues. It's very, very efficient and effective. Next slide. I'm going to close with a couple of stories as well. As we did this work, we continued to talk about what was most important in our learning. And I've often said to my high schoolers that your GPA might get you an interview, but it won't get you the job. And it definitely won't keep the job. So our graduate profile is something that we use kindergarten through 12th grade. And during this COVID time, we saw this magnified, and we could embed it in our conversations. We could talk about the need to collaborate virtually, the idea of communicating virtually. And the one that I've circled, this self-directed and resilient individual, is one that I think was tested and tried. One of the more poignant stories that I heard as we were going through this was a story of a young high school man, 16 years old, who was working part-time as a CNA in our local nursing home. This young man lived with his grandpa and grandma, So he had moved into the garage. That's his home, because he didn't want to expose his grandparents to COVID should he bring that home from his work environment. That to me is a real example of citizenship. That to me is a real example of how you overcome adversity and how you demonstrate a growth mindset. One of the most exciting things that I saw through this whole thing was the way that people could empathize with each other and reach out and meet each other's needs, even if they were living in a virtual world. The way that they would develop school videos to encourage students, the way that they would do the drive-bys, the way that one of my fifth graders developed a project to raise money for small business owners who were shut down. It was a fundraising campaign that definitely made a difference. Probably more from a morale perspective than a monetary perspective, but she saw something bigger than herself. And that idea of, Tom shared about, what kind of person are you? My last example that I'm going to give is last night I had a board meeting. I went long till about 10:30. But in that board meeting, a reflection of the graduate profile was a petition signed by about 1,200 of my alumni, encouraging us to embrace the opportunity to address racism and offering their support. I had people from across the world, a student who's an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, an educator who is working for Teach for America, and someone who is in Hong Kong working on cultural proficiency in his organization, all participating and offering to be a part of the solution that we are seeking as we look to equip our students for success as they leave and take on their next challenges. So managing change, it's not for the faint-hearted, but it is absolutely, absolutely what our students need. It is, I will never, ever tell a teacher my goal is to make their life easy. Our kids deserve our very best, and that's hard work. So, thank you.
Pat, thank you so much. And I know we're closing in on the top of the hour, but there are a couple of really great questions here. And one may be quick, which is from Roman Stearns on how have you interacted with the state accountability systems? And Roman, all 50 states have provided waivers, canceling state standardized tests essentially, but are there things that you're thinking about with like how accountability could look different, or are you just kind of turning your attention to the second question, which is if you're planning to go back to school in person, are you planning to go back in the fall in person, part-time, blended? What does that look like? So really want to focus on that second question. If you have any insights on the accountability, it would be great to hear too.
Well, Kettle Moraine is planning on face-to-face with modifications, knowing that we will also serve a portion of our population virtually because that's what they want, that's what they need. And knowing that at any time, we will flip nimbly to virtual based on quarantine criteria. So I'm not sure if every state has the same level of response, but this is the way that we are working, that every teacher will be expected to be able to flip based on quarantine, either themselves or a portion of their class into a virtual learning environment. And the accountability piece to me, my state has said that they're going to be administering statewide assessments. I would like to know how, based on quarantine, but we'll find out.
We'll be following that. Tom?
Yeah, and Lindsay, we're just going to go really to focus on what the learners need. It goes for that. Some of them really, the distance or the anywhere, anytime learning, that was not an effective method of learning for them, and they actually should not, that should not necessarily be an option for them. And so we're really looking at what learners need, and those who do have anywhere, anytime learning, it's really going to be pretty tightly structured, and there will always be some level of face time. There will always be some type of connection, physical connection, even for those who are in the distance learning. They will still have to come in at different times to do some things. So we're looking at, again, and we're prepared to check and adjust at any point. And as far as like the state accountability systems or the broader accountability systems is we look more broadly. We feel like because our guaranteed and viable curriculum is aligned to the next generation science standards, and it's aligned to Common Core, that we feel like if we just provide effective learning and produce effective learning and achievement on all of our local measures, the state test, whether it comes or doesn't come, will take care of itself. And that's what we've seen. We've had 6 years of academic gains, actually 7 years now of academic gains, where everything has gone up between 3 and 7% every single year. And last year we actually had the highest gains in English language arts on the state test for all 63 school districts that have similar demographics as Lindsay. We were #1. So our system is working on every accountability measure. So just send them to us and we'll figure it out.
I love it. And I really hope that this is an opportunity, if you have clear goals, if you have that transparent data, that we really take a look at what true local accountability and reciprocity with our communities, and sharing and trusting that data to build that trust locally and with the state and with the federal policymakers. But like, this is a real chance to examine what other accountability models that have better data, more data, and that are more focused on true equity and the outcomes for human flourishment that we hope for. Both presentations were just so fantastic today. I wanna thank you. And just to let everyone know, both of your websites have such great information. Tom, you mentioned learning modules, and Pat, you have a number of resources. We posted that link. So thank you so much. We have on our Aurora Institute website, all of our materials are open educational resources for free download. A COVID-19 page, the Competency Works blog, and I just wanted to do a shout out to John Clemente at South Bronx Community Charter School, who's a school leader who also had a really effective transition during the COVID closures in the epicenter of COVID in many ways in New York City. So we're just trying to share the great work that's happening in the field, and we have seen so much creativity and just positive ways of addressing the very difficult and uncertain times. So for your leadership, Tom, and your leadership, Pat, thank you so much for joining us today. And please let us know what we can do to help you and to help all of you that joined today. Thank you for your time, and please be well. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.